Hello and welcome to the Animal Enrichment Workshop. Today I'm going to be showing you how I make what I refer to as a bristle box and explaining how I think it's the perfect addition to an enrichment library for particularly foraging species. So let's get into it. Alright, so to start us out, I get my dustpan brush that I've purchased from a hardware store. This is the cheapest one, but I think it works for what I need it for. You can obviously get stronger or more natural looking ones depending on the species you're working with and what your requirements are. So if you are using hand tools, you want to cut straight down the middle, or either way. I use power tools for the most part because I've got access to them and they work a lot faster than other stuff. But when you cut down the middle, the fibers go a bit all over the place, so trimming them up, cleaning it up a bit is what you need to do. For this particular dustpan brush, I needed to go straight through the middle section of bristles, and that's why it turned out this way, but the other bristles hold nice and tight because they're not affected. So all of this can be done with hand tools and sanding the little bits of plastic off of the edges there, just cleaning it up before I put it onto the wood. So yeah, if you've got access to power tools, fantastic, but everything can be done with hand tools. It just might take a little bit more effort and a bit more time. Now, where the rounded edge of the dustpan brush was, I'm cutting off that so it's a nice flat edge, because when I put it into the actual box structure, I want it to be nice and flush against the edges of the wood instead of having a rounded bit and not fitting as well. So when it's all smoothed out, I measure up what's left of the dustpan brush, which gets to 11 centimeters in this case, and that's going to be the measurement that I go off when I'm building the frame and cutting the wood for the long pieces, the top and bottom pieces of the bristle box. So marking it out at 11 centimeters with my pencil, and then obviously if you're using a handsaw, get onto that, make sure it's all squared up. If you haven't already heard, measure twice, cut once, which is something that I never used to do. I made a lot of mistakes, wasted a lot of stuff. So now I make sure that everything fits. You can see, making sure that that 11 centimeters is properly 11 centimeters. So I use my saw, I cut, making adjustments for how wide the blade is. So I'm not cutting millimeters off and then having it not fit together. But otherwise, getting my top and bottom piece ready for attaching the bristle brush to. So before I attach the brush to the bottom piece, I'm just measuring out how big I want my side pieces. So top and bottom on there, and I just get a bit of an estimate with the tape measure as to how tall it's going to be, or more of an accurate estimate really. So 10 centimeters is what I'm going to cut those side pieces at, and I've just done that off camera. Now I mark out where I want my pilot holes to go, so that when the screwing is involved, it's not going to split the wood, and it's going to go in far easier than if I was to do it without the pilot holes. So the side pieces I mark out and go all the way through first, and then now I've got those side pieces attached to drilling into the bottom and top pieces, so I mark out where everything's going with those initial pilot holes before I actually screw everything in tightly. Now with the brush piece here, I'm going to show you, I'll drill a pilot hole through the brush piece into the bottom piece of wood. So the screw goes through the brush first before it hits the wood. I can show you marking out where those pilot holes are now. So the pilot holes that come in from the side, you want to make sure that the brush screw pieces aren't going to interfere with the other screws that hold the frame together. So in far enough towards the center with these pilot holes so that the screws hold the brush nice and tight and they're not going to bust out or anything like that. So drilling two on sort of the central areas of that brush, and then I screw them in with a small screw. So I start out with the screwing with a smaller gauge screw, because if you use something too large, it can potentially split that brush, which is obviously not what you want to do. You want to be very, very delicate with the brush as you're screwing the screws in. So if you're not familiar with pilot holes, I've just drilled a hole that's slightly smaller than the screw. If it's too small, the screw will be too strong and too large for the hole and break it. And if the hole that I've drilled is too large, then the screw will just slide through. So at this stage, it's nice that the screw can get through, hold on tightly, but it's not going to crack the plastic. So it's just a smaller hole than the screw's diameter actually is. Now I get these little ends of the screws poking out as I've screwed it through. And that ensures that I've got little bits that I can find the holes with, if that makes sense. So now it's not going to slide around when I try to screw it in, because the ends of the screws hit the holes and they sort of sink in and find where they're supposed to go. So I screw them in, do nice and tight until it's firm, not too tight that it cracks it or anything like that. They do have a bit of give, these plastic brushes, but otherwise if you're too strong you can damage things. Now nice and firm and snug, you can see there. So not poking out or anything like that, smooth for the animal, and it's flush against the edges of the wood. No overhang or anything like that. And then I get on with the other side and do exactly the same thing before I get to doing the rest of the frame. You can see lining it up and exactly the same as I've just done. So once that's done, I get a larger screw. So instead of 4G 20 mils, this time I'm using 6G 30 mil screws. Again, similar to the plastic, or exactly the same really. I've drilled the pilot holes, put the screws through so they find the hole on the other side, and then screw them all the way through, using that larger screw to hold onto the wood better and sink in a bit further than the 20 mil screws obviously. And then just going all the way around like this, drilling the pieces in through my pilot holes. Got the two sides, making sure everything's tucked in nicely, and then putting the top piece in. And that's just a bit of a slide in, making sure that it's nice and flush so it's not overhanging or pushing in too much, and then drilling my last piece or screwing my last pieces in. Obviously this can all be done with hand tools, or you can do it with power tools if you want. But I like to do the screwing with hand tools just to ensure that I'm nice and slow and gentle with it, so I'm not just powering through and breaking anything. But as those last few screws go in, that's generally where you can finish up the project. However, I do like to, if I've got any marks on the wood like I have on this one, I'll use a bit of sandpaper to clean them up. And then I also use the sandpaper and I use a sanding disc on an angle grinder to cut off the edges, or just smooth out the edges, I should say, on the edges of the actual frame of it. So instead of having that firm edge, I've got a smoothed out edge. I just think it looks better and it's a bit nicer and potentially more safe for the animal that's going to be using it. Instead of having that firm edge, I've got a nice softened edge there. Excellent. And now everything's been put together. Back here to explain how it all works and why I absolutely love it. So with this design, it's perfect. I've used it for common marmosets and Australian ravens and magpies, Australian magpies myself. Perfect because they can sort of see what's inside, whether you want to put wet food, dry food, or anything inside like that. And then the common marmosets, obviously, as a thumbnail sort of shows as well, pushing through the bristles to try and get pieces of food, the ravens and magpies sticking their beak through. But obviously it can be used for a range of different species, whatever your mind goes to, really. Now, I usually leave them in their raw form like this. However, you could, if you wanted to, put some like animal safe oils or treatments on the outside just to seal it up if you're using it in wet environments, and particularly through winter if you don't want it getting waterlogged or destroyed or stuff like that. In addition, you can get O hooks tight to the top, and you could even suspend it from something if you're using it for small primate species, or small to medium. I'm not sure, I've not dealt with a lot of primates other than common marmosets, but otherwise if you want to suspend it, that's another option for you, suspending it sideways, long ways, whatever. There's a lot of different options. Wrapping it in cardboard, newspaper, so it's a continuous sort of pass the parcel kind of enrichment item. It has to be torn apart to get to this, and then further to get into the food. So whatever your mind goes to, run with it. The animals will love it, I'm sure. And if they don't, well, it's been enriching enough for you. Thank you very much for watching. Much appreciated. Happy enriching, and until next time, goodbye.